Olivia Colman ordering a husband made of willow sounds like the setup for a ridiculous medieval comedy, and Wicker absolutely leans into that idea. But underneath the mud, the crew jokes, the gossip, and the wooden anatomy. This is also a story about loneliness, desire, conformity, and the dangerous fantasy of creating a partner who exists only to love you. Based on Ursula Wills-Jones's 2008 short story The Wicker Husband, the film is written and directed by Eleanor Wilson and Alex Huston Fisher. Colman plays a foul-smelling fisherwoman who lives on the edge of a deeply unpleasant medieval village. She is mocked, ignored, and treated as someone no respectable man would ever consider marrying. At first, that does not seem to bother her. She has built a life around being alone and appears perfectly capable of surviving without approval from the people around her. Then she accidentally wins a local game predicting who will marry next, and the village turns its attention toward her. Instead of choosing from the terrible men available, she visits the local basket maker, played by Peter Dinklage, and asks him to build her a husband. That is where the movie becomes both absurd and unexpectedly sincere. The basket maker creates a life-sized man woven from willow, played by Alexander Skarsgård. He is not simply a moving sculpture. He speaks, thinks, performs household work, and gives the fisherwoman the kind of attention she has never received from another person. He tells her he was made to be with her. He says the reason he lives and breathes is her. In another kind of movie, those lines would sound impossibly romantic. Here, they are romantic and disturbing at exactly the same time. The Wicker husband cannot lie, and his entire identity has been built around pleasing one woman. He is the perfect partner because he has no history, no competing desires, and no life beyond the role he was designed to perform. That makes Wicker feel strangely relevant. We are living in a moment when some people are forming emotional relationships with artificial intelligence, digital companions, and systems trained to respond with endless patience and affirmation. The movie moves that idea into a filthy medieval village, but the question remains the same. Is love still meaningful when the other person was created to agree with you? The filmmakers do not appear interested in answering that question quietly. The tone is rude, physical, and proudly ridiculous. Villagers urinate in public, insult one another, and treat marriage as a social obligation rather than an emotional bond. Even the marriage rituals are intentionally absurd. The bride wears a heavy copper collar, while the groom's wooden anatomy becomes the subject of jokes, rumors, and practical design questions. The movie is clearly having fun with the idea that this society treats marriage as sacred while behaving in ways that are selfish and vulgar. Dinklage's basket maker stands slightly apart from the rest of the village. He is still theatrical and talkative, delivering long speeches while considering the fisherwoman's request. But he is also the only person with the skill to create something genuinely new. The result is a husband who immediately exposes the weaknesses in every other marriage around him. He cooks, he cleans, he listens. He treats his wife with tenderness. He does not complain about her appearance or smell. He does not disappear into conversations with other men while expecting her to remain silent. Naturally, the other women notice. Elizabeth Debicki plays the tailor's wife, one of the villagers most affected by the new couple. At first, everyone is skeptical of the wooden stranger, but once they see how devoted he is, skepticism begins turning into fascination, envy, and resentment. That social reaction may be the movie's strongest idea. The Wicker husband is dangerous not because he attacks anyone, but because he changes what the villagers believe a husband could be. His kindness makes the other men look worse. His devotion makes the other marriages appear empty. His existence threatens the entire structure of the village. The early scenes between Colman and Skarsgård are surprisingly tender. The fisherwoman, who has spent years neglected and ridiculed, experiences affection for the first time. She is not disturbed by the fact that every part of him is made from wood. To her, he is more emotionally alive than anyone she has ever known. Skarsgård also appears to have been designed carefully enough to remain strange without becoming completely alienating. He is recognizable beneath the woven willow covering, but he is not presented as a conventional fantasy hero. He sits somewhere between a human man and a handmade object. That balance is important. If he looked too perfect, the village's reaction would feel obvious. If he looked too disturbing, the audience would never believe the fisherwoman could fall in love with him. The movie needs us to understand both the attraction and the discomfort. The relationship becomes more complicated when rumors begin spreading about the husband's loyalty. The tailor's wife places doubt in the fisherwoman's mind, and a woman who once seemed completely independent begins questioning the one person who has never given her a reason to distrust him. This is where the story may become less convincing. The fisherwoman moves from rejecting marriage to accepting a custom-built partner, to becoming deeply attached, and then to doubting him because of village gossip. That change is necessary for the fable, but it risks making her feel less like a complicated person and more like a character being pushed toward a predetermined moral lesson. Still, Colman is probably the right actor to make those emotional shifts work. She can move from cruelty to vulnerability, from comedy to heartbreak, often within the same scene. Her character may be unpleasant, but she is not meant to be simple. The story also benefits from the contrast between her and the husband. She is defensive because the world has taught her to expect rejection. He is open because he was created without the ability to imagine betrayal. That makes the central tragedy easy to understand. The more perfectly he loves her, the harder it becomes for her to believe that love can be real. Wicker may look like a dirty medieval sex comedy, but it appears to be aiming for something more complicated. It is a satire about marriage, social pressure, jealousy, and the fantasy of a partner who has no needs of his own. The most interesting question is not whether the Wicker husband is human. It is whether the villagers are capable of treating anyone humanely. The film's tagline says, "It's good to find a hard man." That joke tells you exactly what kind of movie this is. But the deeper idea is much less comfortable. A partner built to love you may feel perfect until you realize perfection leaves no room for freedom. Wicker opens in limited theaters on October 23rd before expanding nationwide 1 week later. I want to know what you think about this strange premise. Does a medieval romance about an artificial husband sound brilliant, ridiculous, or somehow both? Because beneath all the crude humor, the movie may be asking one of the most modern questions possible. Would you rather be loved by a flawed person who chooses you, or by a perfect creation that never had a choice?